Beyond the Gates spoilers teased that Nicole's anger burned hotter than anyone expected when she discovered that Andre had secretly married Dani. Her voice, usually calm even in stressful situations, turned sharp, every word laced with disbelief and accusation. To Nicole, Andre's secrecy was a betrayal not just of friendship, but of the trust that bound their small group together. Her thoughts raced with images of how quickly private truths became public scandals in their circle. Yet as the minutes stretched and her own fury echoed back at her, Nicole began to feel the sting of her own harshness. She replayed the tone she had used with Andre, the way her words had cornered him rather than sought understanding. It dawned on her that she had been unnecessarily cruel, reacting more from shock than reason. Underneath the surface of her rage was an ache she hadn't wanted to acknowledge. She was afraid of being left behind, of not knowing the people closest to her as well as she thought she did. Anita and Vernon had been just as stunned when the news surfaced. The two exchanged glances heavy with disbelief, caught off guard not only by the marriage itself but by the secrecy surrounding it. Yet their reaction quickly shifted. Anita, thoughtful and cautious, studied Dani closely and found herself impressed that Dani didn't shy away from responsibility. Dani wasn't shrinking in the face of judgment. Instead, she stood upright, meeting each whispered question head-on with a quiet but unmistakable resolve. Vernon too felt an unexpected calmness, almost admiration, when he saw Dani refusing to grumble. If she could face the storm, they reasoned, perhaps she could withstand what lay ahead. And with that realization, Anita and Vernon found themselves surprisingly at ease, relieved even, that Dani was not someone who would run from the chaos she had helped create. Nicole, however, remained uneasy. She confided her thoughts in hushed tones, her expression pinched with worry. The imposter who had been spreading false stories online was gaining massive traction. The numbers were undeniable: clicks, views, comments, shares. The growth was exponential, unstoppable, and Nicole feared it would spiral into something uncontrollable. In her mind's eye, she could already see Dani's name trending, not as a bride but as the centerpiece of ridicule. Nicole's hands trembled slightly as she admitted her fears. If the false narratives were left unchecked, they could cement themselves as truth in the public consciousness. Vernon, who had been silent for a long stretch, finally spoke. He exuded a confidence Nicole wished she could borrow. He was certain his subordinates could trace the origins of the posts, dismantle the smear before it reached its peak. His voice carried conviction, but underneath it was a promise he would have to prove. Could he truly erase what had already taken root in so many screens and minds? Meanwhile, in the shadows of this escalating storm, Caroline and Hayley couldn't contain their delight. To them, Dani's secret marriage unraveling in the public sphere was poetic justice. They reveled in every whisper, every screenshot, every shocked reaction that rippled through social feeds. The faster it spread, the wider their smirks grew. Hayley in particular relished her role as messenger. She rushed to Bill with the explosive news, savoring the anticipation of his reaction. And when Bill's face fell, when his eyes widened in disbelief, it was everything she had hoped for. Bill was speechless, his thoughts tangled in the mess of his ex-wife marrying a man far younger, and in secret no less. Hayley's heart raced with a strange euphoria, feeding off his shock. For a fleeting moment, she felt victorious, as though Dani's downfall would cement her own place at Bill's side. But the victory was short-lived. Hayley's elation curdled when she realized Bill's next steps. Rather than turning away from Dani in disgust, he stormed toward her, driven by a need to confront her directly. Hayley's satisfaction twisted into jealousy, her stomach churning at the thought of Bill standing face to face with Dani again. The very outcome she thought would cement her superiority instead threatened to rip it apart. When Bill arrived, the tension between him and Dani ignited instantly. Dani was on the phone, her tone strained, as she discussed the possibility of annulling her marriage to Andre. Her words were heavy with conflict, but before she could finish the call, Bill's voice cut through the air like a blade. He demanded to know what she was doing, his outrage unrestrained. To him, the very idea of this marriage was reckless, humiliating even, especially with their children caught in the crossfire of gossip and public scorn. He accused her of embarrassing not only herself but their family. His voice trembled with indignation, every word spoken not just as an ex-husband but as a father fearing what his children might endure at school, online, everywhere. But Dani wasn't about to fold under Bill's accusations. Her anger flared just as fiercely, and she shot back with words that pierced deeper than Bill expected. She reminded him of his own betrayals, of how he had slept with Hayley even before their divorce was finalized. She hurled the truth at him with venom. Hayley had been Naomi's friend, someone their daughter trusted, and Bill had crossed a line so profound it made his judgment of her seem laughable. Dani's voice rose, not with desperation but with authority. How dare he question her choices when he had already sunk lower? Dani's words were surgical strikes, cutting through the hypocrisy that Bill carried like armor. For a moment, Bill faltered, his anger wobbling under the weight of Dani's accusations. Yet pride wouldn't let him crumble in front of her. He sneered, grasping at the last insult he could muster, calling her marriage to Andre nothing more than a childish stunt, a parody of real love. Dani didn't flinch. She turned his insult back at him, pointing out how Hayley, his so-called wife, was little more than a child bride in her eyes. The word struck Bill like a slap, and his face hardened. Realizing he had no ground left to stand on, Bill stormed out, his fury unresolved, leaving Dani with her chest heaving, her knuckles white with restrained rage. Back at his own home, Bill had no reprieve. Hayley's jealousy exploded as she confronted him about his sudden rush to Dani's side. Her questions came fast, sharp as knives, demanding to know why Dani still had the power to rattle him. Bill's silence was damning. His eyes betrayed him before his mouth could form excuses, and Hayley's suspicions solidified into certainty. She could see the storm in him, the way Dani's presence stirred something deeper than disdain. Hayley's anger transformed into fear, the kind that gnawed at her from the inside. If Bill still carried a torch for Dani, even buried under resentment, then where did that leave her? Meanwhile, Dani sought solace in Andre's steady presence. She confessed her confusion, her doubts, and her determination not to be swayed by Bill's outbursts. Andre listened carefully, his expression unreadable at first. Dani admitted that perhaps they should let their marriage stand for now, not rush into dissolving it. Maybe the bond, even if born in secrecy and controversy, could serve as a test. If they found strength together, then perhaps it was real. And if not, they could part ways later, without haste, without fear. Andre, ever pragmatic, agreed, though a flicker of worry danced behind his eyes. The very foundation of their union was already unstable, and Dani's words were both reassurance and warning. They were bound, but for how long? In the quiet moments that followed, Dani's mind swirled with questions she dared not voice. Was Bill's anger truly rooted in concern for their children, or was it jealousy clawing its way to the surface? Had the exposure of her secret marriage awakened something in him he hadn't realized he still carried? The thought unsettled her. For years, she had convinced herself she was done with him, that his betrayal had permanently severed the bond they once shared. But the heat in his eyes when he confronted her, the rawness in his voice, suggested something deeper. Was it hatred? Was it lingering love? Or perhaps a dangerous mixture of both? Caroline and Hayley, meanwhile, speculated whether the leak of Dani and Andre's engagement party had been part of a larger scheme. The timing, the sudden flood of information, it all seemed too precise to be accidental. Hayley clung to the possibility that they had orchestrated Dani's downfall, savoring the idea of being the puppeteer behind the chaos. But Caroline remained skeptical. What mattered more than who leaked the party was how the aftermath was unfolding, and in that respect, Bill's unpredictable reactions were threatening to undo everything they had hoped for. Instead of severing Dani from his life completely, he seemed drawn back into her orbit, as though the chaos itself was pulling him closer to the woman he once called his wife. For Hayley, this realization was devastating. The more she watched Bill, the more she realized that Dani's presence was not fading but intensifying, reigniting a conflict that could shatter everything she had fought to claim. The air around them all grew heavy with tension, with each revelation adding fuel to a fire already raging out of control. Nicole, Anita, Vernon, Caroline, Hayley, Bill, Dani, and each of them were now tied together in a web of choices, betrayals, and secrets. The truth about the leak loomed like a shadow waiting to be unveiled, but the real danger lay in the emotions that refused to be buried. Jealousy, pride, guilt, and longing swirled together, threatening to collapse the fragile stability they all clung to. And as Dani and Andre held on to their marriage, uncertain and wavering, the question lingered like smoke in the air: was this union destined to strengthen them against the odds, or would it ignite the final explosion that would tear them and everyone around them apart? The fallout of Dani and Andre's secret marriage did not fade with time. Instead, it deepened, creating new cracks in every relationship connected to them. Nicole's regret for lashing out at Andre lingered, and though she tried to repair the damage, her apology came across hesitant, almost half-hearted. Andre accepted her words, but the sting of her earlier anger remained lodged in his chest, leaving him wary of just how much he could confide in her moving forward. Nicole, in turn, doubled down on her fears about the viral storm. She found herself obsessively refreshing feeds, watching the numbers climb higher, terrified that each new post would cement Dani's scandal as the narrative people believed. Though Vernon reassured her again and again that his team was tracking down the source of the leaks, Nicole's anxiety painted every silence as a looming disaster. Anita tried to counterbalance Nicole's spiraling dread with a measured voice of reason. She reminded everyone that Dani had shown resilience before and would likely do so again, but even Anita couldn't deny the intensity of the online backlash. Dani's image was being dissected ruthlessly, her age compared with Andre's, her history with Bill, her reputation as a mother, all of it twisted into fuel for gossip. Vernon worked tirelessly behind the scenes, but every time one post was taken down, 3 more appeared in its place, echoing the same rumors with new venom. It was like cutting off the head of a hydra. The monster only grew stronger. Caroline, watching from the sidelines, savored the spectacle. She loved the way Dani's name became a hashtag synonymous with scandal. The way whispers spread through social circles she barely had to touch. To her, Dani's humiliation was entertainment. Hayley shared in the mockery at first, gloating that Dani's so-called perfect facade was crumbling for all to see. But her amusement fractured when she noticed Bill's behavior shifting again. Rather than ridiculing Dani, he grew quieter, more withdrawn, as though replaying every argument they'd ever had in his mind. Hayley's attempts to rile him into laughing about Dani's predicament only ended in stiff silences and irritated sighs. The more Hayley pressed, the more Bill slipped away emotionally. His anger toward Dani hadn't dissolved, it had morphed into something more complicated. At night, lying awake beside Hayley, he replayed their confrontation. Dani's words echoed with brutal clarity, her accusations about his betrayal and her dismissal of his right to judge her. Instead of quelling his feelings, those words stoked a fire inside him. He hated her defiance as much as he respected it. He hated her strength as much as he longed for it. And beneath all that hate, an undeniable truth gnawed at him: Dani still mattered to him, more than Hayley ever could. Hayley's jealousy became impossible to contain. She confronted Bill with venom, throwing accusations at him, accusing him of longing for Dani in ways he wouldn't admit. Bill denied it, but his defensiveness only made her suspicions stronger. Their arguments grew louder, rawer, spilling into nights of slammed doors and fractured silences. Naomi, caught in the middle, refused to visit as often, disturbed by the toxic energy radiating from her father's home. Hayley, once so smug about being chosen over Dani, now felt her grip slipping, and desperation made her reckless. Meanwhile, Dani clung to Andre with determination, insisting that they let their marriage play out rather than rushing to undo it. Yet even as she spoke with conviction, a part of her knew her heart was entangled elsewhere. Andre sensed it too. He saw the way Dani grew restless whenever Bill's name came up, the way her eyes lingered when the subject of their children was raised, the way her anger toward Bill carried an undertone that didn't quite sound like hatred. Andre tried to suppress his insecurities, but they festered in the quiet moments, whispering doubts about whether he was merely a stand-in for the man Dani truly still loved. Nicole's focus shifted from Dani's scandal to Vernon's investigation. She began to wonder whether the leaks were orchestrated by someone closer than they imagined. Caroline and Hayley had motive, certainly, but the precision of the timing suggested more than spite. Nicole whispered theories to Anita late at night, suggesting that perhaps the leak was meant not only to humiliate Dani but to manipulate Bill. Anita, who prided herself on her calm rationality, found herself unsettled by the idea. The pieces fit too well, the exposure, the timing, the emotional unraveling it caused. But if that was true, then the story wasn't just about Dani's downfall, it was about pushing Bill toward a decision he hadn't fully made yet. Bill's indecision became the axis around which everything else spun. Hayley watched him like a hawk, growing more paranoid with each hour he spent in silence. Dani wrestled with her feelings, torn between the marriage she was trying to honor and the unresolved connection with her ex-husband. Andre, though outwardly patient, began plotting his own responses, considering what he would do if Dani ultimately chose someone else. Nicole and Anita positioned themselves as mediators, though both were privately unsure whether their interventions would soothe or worsen the tension. And Vernon pressed harder with his subordinates, demanding results that would prove once and for all who was pulling the strings. Caroline remained the wild card. She enjoyed playing spectator but was not above nudging the flames when it suited her. A carefully dropped rumor here, a screenshot shared anonymously, their small pushes that kept the scandal alive while allowing her to remain blameless. To her, the unraveling relationships were entertainment, but she also knew the longer the chaos endured, the more power she held. If Dani fell, Caroline could rise, and she wasn't about to let that opportunity slip away. As weeks stretched into months, the lines between public scandal and private betrayal blurred. Dani and Andre appeared together in public, presenting a united front, but whispers followed them everywhere. Bill, unable to control his emotions, became increasingly hostile toward Hayley, resenting her attempts to gloat about Dani's misfortunes. Hayley's laughter at Dani's expense no longer satisfied him, instead, it repulsed him, highlighting the pettiness that had once seemed charming. Naomi, witnessing the decline of both parents, withdrew further, her relationship with Bill especially strained as she struggled to accept Hayley as a stepmother she had never truly respected. Nicole's fears about the viral narrative were realized when the scandal reached national headlines. Talk shows, gossip blogs, and podcasts dissected Dani's every move, framing her as reckless, unstable, and desperate for attention. Nicole wept privately, blaming herself for not pushing Vernon harder to control the damage sooner. Anita, though sympathetic, reminded her that no one could stop the tide once it had started. What mattered now was how Dani responded, and whether she could reclaim the narrative instead of letting it consume her. And yet, through all of it, Dani remained defiant. Her confrontation with Bill had awakened something inside her, a reminder that she no longer owed him obedience or silence. She was flawed, yes, but she would not allow herself to be diminished. Each time the world pointed to her mistakes, she answered not with retreat but with unshakable presence. Andre stood by her side, but Dani's fire was her own. It was this fire that drew Bill back again and again, unable to let go, unable to move forward with Hayley as though nothing had changed. Hayley's simmering jealousy reached a breaking point. She began to lash out not just at Bill but at others around her, desperate to reassert control. Caroline, once her ally in ridicule, started to distance herself, recognizing that Hayley's volatility made her a liability. Vernon's team uncovered fragments of evidence suggesting multiple sources for the leaks, with Hayley's name appearing in ways that could no longer be dismissed. Nicole and Anita confronted her privately, urging her to stop before she destroyed herself completely, but Hayley only laughed bitterly, insisting she was protecting what was rightfully hers. The stage was set for a collision that none of them could avoid. Dani and Andre's fragile marriage was on borrowed time. Bill's suppressed feelings threatened to explode, Hayley's jealousy sharpened into dangerous desperation, and Caroline lingered in the shadows, ready to exploit whatever came next. Nicole and Anita tried to hold the threads together, but even their combined efforts couldn't stop the inevitable unraveling. Every decision in the days ahead would matter. Would Dani continue to cling to her marriage with Andre, or would the gravitational pull of her history with Bill draw her back into his orbit? Would Hayley's spiraling jealousy push her to expose herself as the true saboteur, Or would she find a way to twist the narrative once again to her advantage? Would Vernon's investigation reveal the full truth, forcing the group to reckon with betrayal from within? And perhaps most haunting of all, would Bill finally admit what his silence had already made clear? That Dani was not just his past but the future he still longed for, even if it destroyed everything else in the process? The answers waited like storm clouds on the horizon, ready to break open at any moment, and none of them could yet see how destructive the downpour would be. The threads that bound Dani, Andre, Bill, Hayley, Nicole, Anita, Vernon, and Caroline together had been stretched so thin that any slight tug threatened to snap them completely. The secrets, betrayals, and simmering jealousies had turned into a storm that none of them could control, and yet each of them clung to their roles in it, unable or unwilling to step back. The conclusion was always inevitable, though the shape of it remained uncertain until the very last moments. Dani's decision to hold steady in her marriage with Andre became more complicated as the world continued to scrutinize her every move. She wanted to prove she was strong enough to withstand the criticism, that she would not bend simply because others demanded it. Yet every confrontation with Bill left her shaken, her anger at him tinged with a heat she tried desperately to deny. Andre felt the distance between them growing. No matter how many reassurances Dani offered, he tried to hold on, but even he could see that Dani's fire burned brightest when Bill was near, not when she stood beside him. Bill, for his part, wrestled with a conflict he could no longer hide. His resentment toward Dani hadn't faded, but it had transformed into something messier, an acknowledgement that he was still bound to her in ways Hayley could never replace. Hayley saw it too, and her jealousy tipped into desperation. She confronted Bill one final time, unleashing every accusation, every fear. He admitted nothing, but his silence was louder than any confession. That silence broke her. Hayley, who had once thrived on control, realized she was losing him to the very woman she had mocked and resented most. Nicole and Anita, watching all of this unfold, tried to anchor themselves in reason. They reminded Dani of her strength, urged Bill to consider his children before his pride, and pressed Vernon for answers about the leaks that had sparked so much destruction. Vernon's investigation finally produced undeniable proof. Caroline had fanned the flames by leaking pieces of Dani and Andre's story to the public, though Hayley's fingerprints were also visible on several posts. The revelation shattered what fragile unity remained. Dani confronted Caroline with fury, exposing her schemes, while Hayley's betrayal left Bill speechless, his trust in her crumbling. Caroline, unrepentant, shrugged off the accusations. To her, it had always been a game, and she had simply played better than the rest. But her smugness only further isolated her, and for the first time, she found herself cut off from the very people whose lives she had manipulated. Hayley fared no better. Bill's disgust toward her reached its peak, and Naomi's rejection of her was final. Hayley's position as Bill's partner collapsed, and she was left alone, consumed by the very bitterness she had wielded against Dani. With Caroline exposed and Hayley undone, the focus shifted back to Dani and Bill. Their final confrontation was quieter than anyone expected. There were no shouting matches, no venomous accusations. Instead, it was raw, almost tender, a conversation stripped down to the truth. Bill admitted that his anger at Dani's marriage to Andre had been fueled not by concern alone but by jealousy, by the realization that he still wanted her. Dani admitted she was torn, that Andre represented stability but Bill represented history, family, and a love she had never truly extinguished. For a long time, neither of them spoke, both realizing that any choice they made would reshape not only their lives but the lives of those around them. Andre, watching from the sidelines, finally chose dignity over desperation. He told Dani he would not beg for her love if her heart belonged elsewhere. His voice carried no malice, only weary acceptance. Dani was moved by his grace but knew that his words freed her from the indecision she had clung to. She could no longer pretend that her bond with Bill was gone. Andre stepped away, leaving Dani and Bill to face the truth together. The ending was not neat. The scandal lingered, though its intensity eventually dulled as new stories captured the public's attention. Caroline drifted further into obscurity, her games no longer welcome. Hayley struggled to find her footing after losing Bill, her bitterness isolating her even from old allies. Nicole and Anita remained pillars of quiet strength, their loyalty tested but unbroken, while Vernon's role as investigator gave him a new respect among the group, though he carried the weight of knowing how close they had all come to imploding. For Dani and Bill, the path forward was uncertain. They agreed to move slowly, to focus on rebuilding trust rather than rushing back into old patterns. Naomi's cautious acceptance mattered most to them, and they knew winning it back would take time. Dani's marriage to Andre would always be a chapter marked by controversy, but it had also forced her to confront the truth she had long avoided, that her life, for better or worse, was still intertwined with Bill's. The storm had not destroyed them, but it had left scars. Each of them would carry the memory of betrayal, jealousy, and regret. Yet beneath it all was the faint possibility of renewal. Dani's fire had not been extinguished. Bill's silence had finally given way to truth. And though their ending was far from perfect, it was honest, born not of appearances or secrecy but of raw, undeniable connection.